In the high summer of 2015, three brothers from Billings, Montana, Aaron Bryan and Dylan Mercer, packed up a silver pickup truck for what was supposed to be a simple 5-day escape into Glacier National Park. They were 25 identical triplets who had spent their whole lives side by side, same hometown, same small apartment complex, same long days working in their father's auto repair shop. To the people who knew them, it made sense that they would celebrate another birthday together under the pines. On the morning they left, their mother, Carol Mercer, stood on the front steps and watched them load coolers, fishing rods, and worn canvas duffel bags into the truck. The July heat was already pressing in, and she kept circling back with the same questions. Did they have enough water? The emergency radio extra batteries. Aaron, the one who usually took the lead, told her they'd be fine. He had studied the maps, checked the weather, picked a familiar spot near a remote lake tucked deep in the Blackfoot Valley. Their last confirmed stop came that afternoon at a small general store in West Glacier. The owner remembered three young men who looked like mirror images of each other laughing, buying extra flashlight batteries, more fishing line, and a bag of ice for the cooler. They paid in cash, stepped back into the sunlight, and drove north toward the dirt road that would take them to their campsite. They were never seen again. Days later, when the brothers failed to come home, that silver truck would be found sitting alone at the trailhead, unlocked with their phones and wallets still inside, and an empty wilderness stretching out on all sides. If you're listening to this right now, let me know where you're tuning in from. In the summer of 2015, the Mercer brothers lived a life that from the outside seemed settled and predictable. Aaron Bryan and Dylan, 25-year-old identical triplets, had become a familiar presence in Billings, Montana. People noticed them not because they sought attention, but because it was impossible not to. Three young men who looked exactly alike moved in sync without meaning to, and rarely went anywhere without the others. They worked together at their father's long-standing auto repair shop on the south side of town, a place where the radio was always tuned to classic rock, and the bays smelled of motor oil and Montana dust. Most days, the brothers spent more time debating spark plug brands or arguing about who made the best fishing knots than anything resembling real conflict. They lived in the same modest apartment complex a few miles from the shop. Different units technically, but close enough that they knocked on each other's doors every morning before heading to work. Their father, Michael Mercer, joked that he hadn't needed an employee schedule in 10 years if one of his sons showed up. The other two were right behind him. Their mother, Carol, remained the emotional center of the family. She'd spent a good portion of her life tracking the movements of three identical sons and never quite outgrew the habit of worrying about them. The outdoors had always been the place where the brothers felt most like themselves. They grew up fishing the Yellowstone River and hiking the Beartooth Range, and by their early 20s they were confident backcountry campers who could navigate rough terrain without much thought. Glacier National Park had become their favorite place to reset when life felt too cramped or routine. Tall pines, jagged ridges, quiet lakes, it offered the kind of space they didn't get anywhere else. The plan for July 2015 wasn't unusual. The brothers had taken the same kind of trip every summer since high school. This time, Aaron picked a remote lake in the Blackfoot Valley, a place the three of them had visited twice before. The terrain there was rugged, dense forests, narrow dirt roads, and pockets of deep silence where cell signals disappeared completely. It was exactly the kind of place they sought out when the heat settled in and the shop felt too small. The timing made sense as well. The auto shop had been slow that month, and their parents encouraged them to take a few days off before the late summer rush came in. Carol, who normally kept her concerns quiet, voiced a little more hesitation than usual. The long-term weather forecast showed heat followed by possible thunderstorms, and she asked more than once whether they had packed enough water and emergency supplies. Aaron reminded her that he'd been preparing the trip for weeks. Topographic maps lined the kitchen table for days leading up to the departure. The three men knew the area, knew the trails, and had all the equipment they needed. On July 15th, they left Billings before noon in their silver pickup truck headed northwest toward the park. The drive took them past wheat fields, gas stations, and long stretches of two-lane road where mountains rose slowly on the horizon. They stopped only once for gas and again later at a general store in West Glacier, where they bought batteries, fishing line, and a bag of ice. Their joking with each other caught the store owner's attention, each claiming he would outfish the others, each insisting he already knew the best spot along the shoreline. Nothing in their demeanor hinted at trouble. They seemed relaxed, familiar with their plan, and ready to spend a few quiet days outdoors. The Mercer brothers knew the isolation of the Blackfoot Valley. Once they left the paved road and turned onto the long dirt access route, they were essentially stepping into a part of Montana where days could pass without seeing another person. Rangers rarely patrolled that area except on weekends. Weather could change without warning. Trails were unmarked in places broken by steep ravines, stream crossings, and stretches of dense undergrowth, but the brothers had trained themselves to handle terrain like that. They had done it for years. Still, there was something about the region, a mix of beauty and unpredictability, that made even experienced hikers feel a little uneasy. You could walk for miles under steady sunlight, and then in minutes be swallowed by shadow as clouds rolled over the ridge. Streams looked shallow until you stepped into them and felt the current pull at your legs. Old pines creaked unpredictably in the wind. At night, the cold settled fast, even in the middle of July. People familiar with the Blackfoot Valley would later say that the brothers were entering a place where the land itself had a way of closing in. Not hostile, just indifferent. What happened out there depended entirely on preparation timing and a person's ability to read the landscape. And sometimes even that wasn't enough. By mid-afternoon, the brothers were heading toward the trailhead that would lead them to the lake they planned to camp near. They had done everything they usually did, packed carefully, checked their supplies, kept their mother updated on their route. Nothing about that day suggested it would unfold any differently from every other trip they had taken. But the deeper they drove into the valley, the more the forest thickened, the more the sunlight thinned, and the quieter everything became. Within 24 hours, the Mercer brothers would vanish into that silence. On the evening of July 20th, 2015, Michael and Carol Mercer sat in the quiet of their Billings home, expecting the familiar sound of their silver pickup rolling back into the driveway. Their sons, Aaron, Brian, and Dylan, were supposed to be home by late afternoon. The plan had been simple: 5 days up near a secluded lake in the Blackfoot Valley, then home in time for work on Tuesday. By nightfall, there were no texts, no calls, and no headlights cresting the hill outside their neighborhood. At first, they tried to reassure each other. Maybe the brothers decided to stay an extra night. Maybe they found a fishing spot too good to leave. Aaron usually sent updates, but remote pockets of Montana often had no service. They went to bed uneasy but convinced the morning would bring a message. It didn't. By July 21st, the silence stretched into something neither parent could reason away. The triplets had never gone more than 2 days without checking in, not once in 25 years. Before noon, Carol picked up the phone and contacted the Flathead County Sheriff's Office. Her voice, steady but strained, carried the weight of a mother who already sensed something was wrong. Deputy Sheriff Laura Whitaker, a 14-year veteran known for her work in backcountry search operations, was assigned to the call. The moment she heard the details, 3 experienced hikers vanishing together in a region they knew well. Her concern shifted from routine to urgent. Multiple people disappearing simultaneously in a wilderness area was rare. When the missing individuals were seasoned outdoorsmen, it was even rarer. Whitaker immediately assembled a small preliminary team and drove toward the Blackfoot Valley trailhead the brothers had planned to use. By late afternoon, the search began in earnest. The Mercer brothers' pickup was exactly where it should have been, parked neatly in the shade near the start of a narrow trail climbing toward the lake. The truck was unlocked. The keys rested on the dashboard. Inside, investigators found their wallets, driver's licenses, and around $300 in cash. 3 cell phones lay dead in the glove compartment, drained of battery. Nothing about the truck suggested disorder. No broken glass, no torn upholstery, no signs of a struggle. Everything appeared as if the brothers had stepped out for a short hike and fully intended to return. Tire tracks in the soft soil showed only one set theirs. No other vehicles had been near that clearing for days. The initial ground search focused on the 3-mile trail leading up toward the water. The path itself was rugged but defined, cutting through stands of old pine and across 2 shallow stream crossings. Whitaker brought in search dogs from Missoula, hoping scent trails would help reconstruct the brothers' movements. For the first 1.5 miles, the dogs followed a clean track up the trail. Then the searchers spotted something. A dark blue baseball cap hung from a low pine branch, positioned almost neatly, as though someone had placed it there intentionally. The embroidered patch displayed the Mercer Auto Repair logo, immediately recognizable to the family and to the deputies who already had a copy of the brothers' photo. The cap belonged to Dylan, the youngest, by just minutes. There were no rips, no blood, no sign it had been torn off in a struggle. But it was a marker, one that made searchers straighten their backs and move more carefully into the brush. 1/2 mile farther up, near a rocky outcrop overlooking a steep ravine, something changed. The dogs slowed, circled, then lost the scent entirely. Not weakened, lost. As though the trail had been cut off, as though the 3 young men had stepped into thin air. Whitaker ordered a broader sweep of the surrounding slope, but the terrain grew sharply vertical, cutting into jagged stone and dense undergrowth. Searchers fanned out, shouting the brothers' names into canyons that swallowed sound. There was no reply. Over the next 48 hours, the operation escalated. What began as a small, focused effort turned into a full-scale search involving park rangers, county deputies, volunteers, and later National Guard aircraft. Helicopters traced grid patterns overhead, scanning for disturbances in foliage or flashes of gear. Ground teams combed ravines, crawled through creek beds, and pushed into off-trail areas where fallen trees and slick rocks made even slow progress dangerous. Still nothing. No footprints, no gear, no fishing rods, no food wrappers, no torn fabric, nothing beyond the cap that could be conclusively linked to the Mercer brothers. By the end of the first week, the absence itself became frightening. Experienced rescuers, people who had found hikers in conditions far worse, were now gathering at makeshift command posts with maps spread across hoods of trucks, struggling to plot new theories. The Blackfoot Valley was unforgiving thick timber, sudden drop-offs, hidden crevices, and miles of terrain untouched by cell towers. Weather came and went without warning. A person could vanish in those woods. But 3 at once, 3 who knew how to navigate, felt like something else entirely. As more days passed, hope frayed on every edge of the search. Carol and Michael drove up daily, standing beside deputies as helicopters rose into the gray Montana sky. The family's anguish began to soak into the community. Volunteers from Billings, Kalispell, and small towns scattered across the county arrived with backpacks, headlamps, and enough supplies to stay in the woods overnight. Local churches organized prayer circles. Outdoor groups shared maps, trail photos, and theories on social media, some helpful, many far-fetched. The pressure on law enforcement grew heavier. Every false lead drained precious time. One hiker thought he heard voices in a ravine. A team rappelled down only to find rushing water echoing against stone. Another thought she saw smoke on a ridge. It turned out to be heat haze rising from a sun-soaked rock face. Day after day, the search radius expanded. 10 miles, 12 miles, 15. Crews noted every broken twig, every piece of twisted brush, anything that might hint that 3 men had passed by. Yet each discovery led nowhere. By the end of 2 weeks, the official operation scaled down. There were no bodies, no campsite, no evident fall or injury, no indication of foul play. It was as if the Mercer brothers had stepped into the forest and simply dissolved into the weathered landscape. But families do not scale down. Michael reopened the auto shop, though he rarely got through a repair without pausing, staring into space and running the same questions through his head. Carol organized volunteer search parties and printed flyers with her sons' faces, 3 nearly identical smiles looking out from bulletin boards at gas stations and grocery stores. The brothers' apartment remained exactly as they left it. 3 sets of boots lined by the door, fishing poles still leaning against the closet, a grocery list for the following weekend sitting on the counter. Summer shifted into fall, and the search became a cycle of renewed hope and crushing disappointment. Whenever snow melted briefly on warm days, volunteers headed back into the woods looking for anything the thaw might reveal. By the first winter, the case turned cold, officially still open but without new leads. For law enforcement, it was a rare and unsettling kind of silence. For the community, it became a wound that refused to heal. And for the Mercer family, it became a waiting that felt both endless and unavoidable. 3 sons had walked into the Montana wilderness. Not one clue explained why they never walked out. Nearly 3 years had passed by the spring of 2018 when the case of the missing Mercer triplets, once the subject of nightly news bulletins and statewide searches, had settled into a painful quiet. Most days, the story lived only in the Mercer household in the small auto shop the family continued to operate, and in the hearts of the volunteers who had combed the Blackfoot Valley until their boots fell apart. The forest, indifferent as ever, kept its silence. But in early March of that year, a phone call from Seattle broke that stillness. A private technology firm developing advanced search and rescue drones asked the Flathead County Sheriff's Office if they could use the Mercer case to test their newest equipment. It was an unusual request, one that under any other circumstances might have been dismissed. But the sheriff's office, stretched thin and lacking new leads, hesitated only long enough to notify the Mercer family. Deputy Laura Whitaker, now 46, had not stopped thinking about the brothers since the day their truck was found. She pushed hard to approve the proposal. If there was even a slight chance the drones could detect something human searchers had missed, she wanted to take it. By late April, when the snowpack thinned and the first warm winds drifted down from the mountains, the operation began. 3 high-resolution drones equipped with thermal imaging pattern recognition software and metal detection sensors took flight above the same valley that had defeated countless search teams. The first day of the drone sweep offered nothing new. The drones retraced the brothers' suspected route, gathering thousands of images of timber stands, creek beds, and rock formations that had been photographed repeatedly in 2015 and 2016. The footage was clean, detailed, but unrevealing. The search team gathered around monitors inside a mobile command trailer had expected as much. It was the second day that changed everything. At 2:15 p.m., as clouds thinned and late afternoon light cut across the canopy, one drone veered over a densely forested slope nearly 6 miles beyond the original search perimeter. From above, the area appeared unremarkable dense pines, fallen branches, shadows pooling in hollows where sunlight rarely reached. But then the drone's artificial intelligence flagged an anomaly, a geometric shape that didn't fit the natural landscape. The operator zoomed in. Under a mat of needles, broken limbs, and 3 years of debris, something blue appeared, a corner of fabric, stiff and faded, barely visible to the human eye. The thermal overlay suggested man-made material. The shape was too angular, too structured to be part of the forest floor. Within seconds, the command trailer fell silent. Investigators leaned closer to the monitors. The Mercer family, who had driven to the site to watch the operation that day, stared without speaking. Even through a grainy live feed, the object felt unmistakable. It was a tent, and not just any tent. The color, the design, the size, it matched the one the brothers had purchased before their trip. The discovery sent a jolt through everyone present, something between dread and relief. For nearly 3 years, the wilderness had denied them even the smallest clue. Now, in a clearing no one had ever reached, something unmistakably human had surfaced. Whitaker ordered a ground team to prepare immediately. Reaching the location would require ropes, mountaineering gear, and expert guidance. The terrain was steep, unstable, and heavily overgrown. One glance at the map explained why earlier search parties had never penetrated that far. The hike took nearly 4 hours. The team, consisting of Whitaker, 2 park rangers, a forensic technician, and a photographer, navigated loose shale slopes, thick deadfall, and a fast-moving stream that didn't appear on any official maps. It was the kind of ground where one misstep could turn dangerous, the kind of place searchers avoided, unless they had a direct reason to go. Now they had one. When Whitaker finally stepped into the clearing, she stopped. The air felt heavy, untouched. The forest around them seemed to press inward, muffling sound. In front of her sat the remains of a blue camping tent partially collapsed beneath fallen branches. Time had done its work. The fabric was bleached in places, torn in others, but there was no doubt it belonged to the Mercer brothers. Personal items lay scattered around the tent as though frozen in the middle of ordinary use. A stove near a cold ash ring. Fishing equipment arranged neatly, sleeping bags inside the tent, pushed aside but intact. There was no sign of a hurried departure, no indication of violence, no evidence of a storm having torn the campsite apart. The scene appeared abandoned, not destroyed. That was the detail that unsettled everyone. It meant the brothers hadn't intended to leave. They had been preparing for the next morning, maybe to fish, maybe to hike, but nothing suggested panic or injury within the camp itself. As the forensic team documented each object, the emotional weight of the moment settled over the clearing. Whitaker felt at first a painful mixture of triumph and dread. For nearly 3 years, she had hoped for a discovery like this. Now that it was here, she understood what it implied. The Mercer family was notified within hours. Their reaction, relief at having something concrete, anguish at what it might mean, echoed through the command post. For the first time since 2015, the case had a direction again. But it also had a new, sharper edge. If the triplets had reached this remote spot alive, why had they vanished afterward? Why leave everything behind? Boots, gear, clothing, and never return to the truck waiting miles away. News of the discovery traveled fast. Local papers picked up the story. Regional stations followed. The case, once dormant, stirred as if it had been holding its breath. People across Montana revisited theories they had set aside, wondering whether the men had gotten lost, been forced away, followed someone, or met a danger hidden by the landscape itself. Inside law enforcement circles, questions multiplied. The site was nearly 6 miles from where the original scent trail ended, farther and in a different direction than anyone expected. No prior aerial sweep had captured this tiny clearing. No ground team had been able to reach it without specialized equipment. That isolation alone suggested that whatever happened to the Mercer brothers occurred far beyond the boundaries investigators once believed they had searched thoroughly. For Whitaker, the discovery marked a turning point she had feared would never come. The tent did not tell the full story. It didn't explain how 3 experienced outdoorsmen vanished from a campsite that showed no signs of struggle. But it confirmed one truth that reshaped the investigation entirely. The brothers had survived long enough to reach this hidden clearing. And something had happened after that. Something the forest had kept hidden for 3 years. With the tent's recovery, the case was no longer frozen in time. It was awake again, breathing, demanding answers. And for the first time since the summer, the Mercer brothers vanished. Investigators felt the weight of possibility return heavy, unsettling, and urgent. The newly discovered campsite forced the investigation into motion with a speed and intensity the case hadn't seen since the first weeks of the disappearance. After nearly 3 years of silence, the forest had finally revealed something tangible, and that meant every assumption, every map, and every theory investigators once relied on had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Deputy Laura Whitaker returned to the clearing the following morning with a full investigative detail. The team included forensic technicians from Helena, an evidence photographer, search and rescue planners, and cadaver dog handlers. What had begun as a missing person search was now treated with the precision of a major crime scene. Their first priority was to secure the area. The tent and every item inside or around it were photographed in place from multiple angles. Time, weather, and wildlife had distorted much of the scene, but investigators could still read the story of the Mercer brothers' last known hours in the arrangement of their belongings. Sleeping bags pushed aside instead of neatly rolled, cooking supplies left out as if they were preparing for a morning meal, fishing gear arranged but unused, nothing packed for travel, nothing suggesting preparation for a long trek. It was the stillness that struck Whitaker most, the eerie sense that whatever drew the brothers from the tent had been sudden, and whatever happened afterward had prevented them from returning even long enough to grab their boots. Those boots, 3 pairs lined neatly outside the tent flap, became one of the earliest forensic puzzles. Outdoor enthusiasts, especially experienced ones like the brothers, never walked barefoot in country, known for sharp rock shelves, prickly undergrowth, or sudden temperature drops. But there they were, 3 pairs untouched since the day the tent collapsed under the weight of weather and time. The sight complicated everything. Were the brothers forced out? Did they hear something? Did one leave and the others follow? None of the explanations aligned neatly with the evidence or the absence of it. After documenting the campsite, the team carefully removed each item and sealed it for transport. The tent, delicate after years of exposure, was handled like an archaeological artifact. Investigators folded the remains section by section, preserving any trace that might cling to its surface. Hair fibers, prints, biological material, or soil patterns. 3 years of rain, snow, wind, and freezing temperatures had almost certainly erased much. But Whitaker knew better than to assume nothing remains. Nature often preserved subtle truths, even in its cruelty. Inside the tent, the sleeping bags offered the best chance for DNA confirmation. Strands of hair were found inside each, later tested and confirmed to match the Mercer brothers. That part was expected. It only reaffirmed what they already knew: the young men had slept in that tent. The next question was when. Forensic scientists studied the tent's deterioration, the corrosion on metal parts, and the degradation of fabric to estimate how long it had been exposed. Their conclusion aligned closely with the timeline investigators feared. The brothers had reached this clearing early in their trip, and likely spent a night or 2 before disappearing. Whatever happened to them had occurred shortly after their arrival. Meanwhile, cadaver dogs swept through the surrounding forest in widening loops. They alerted at several spots, but could not isolate a clear indication of human remains. After 3 years in harsh alpine conditions, even the best-trained dogs struggled to detect scent cones that may have once been strong but had long since scattered or sunk beneath soil and debris. Ground-penetrating radar scanned for buried remains or disturbed earth. Again, nothing. The valley kept its silence. The clearing's location puzzled investigators. It lay nearly a mile off any established trail and required crossing terrain that hikers typically avoided. Yet, the brothers had reached it. Whether by intention or accident remained unclear. The site sat in a natural bowl, invisible from above the tree cover blocking most aerial detection. Even during the original searches, when helicopters crisscrossed the valley for days, this spot had likely been just another patch of dense canopy. It also explained why the massive 2015-2016 effort, despite covering thousands of acres, never stumbled across it. Whitaker assembled a task force to reconstruct the brothers' movements from the moment they left their truck. They retraced the route the scent dogs had taken in 2015, noting where the trail abruptly vanished near the rocky outcrop. That area was a full 6 miles from the hidden clearing. A contradiction emerged. How did the brothers cover that distance without leaving additional tracks or scent? Why did the initial trail lead in one direction, while the tent was found far beyond another? As investigators wrestled with those questions, a witness emerged with information long overlooked. Walter Kowalski, a retired Forest Service worker in his 70s, reported a sighting from July 2015. He lived near the National Forest's border and had spent that summer conducting informal wildlife observations. He recalled seeing 3 young men near a creek 2 miles from what would later be known as the tent site. They matched the brothers' descriptions in height, build, and age. More importantly, Kowalski believed the young men were following someone, though he never saw the person leading them, only heard movement ahead on the trail. The men did not appear distressed. They were walking steadily with purpose. No calls for help, no signs of disorientation. This witness account introduced a possibility investigators had not dared lean toward. The brothers may have left the campsite voluntarily, not because they were fleeing danger or reacting to a sudden emergency. Someone might have led them away. Kowalski's statement contradicted theories of a confused nighttime departure or one triggered by panic, but it raised more questions than it answered. Who were they following? And why would 3 experienced outdoorsmen abandon a prepared campsite without their boots or gear? Detectives began reviewing profiles of individuals known to roam the deeper sections of the Blackfoot Valley. Hunters, reclusive homesteaders, illegal poachers, and drifters often passed through the region. Among them was a name that surfaced repeatedly over the years, Marcus Thornell, a former Army veteran in his mid-40s, who had been living off-grid for more than a decade. Thornell had a history of illegal camping and hunting violations. He avoided contact with authorities, had no fixed address, and was known to vanish into the forest for months at a time. Rangers described him as resourceful, deeply private, and capable of navigating remote terrain with ease. He had no documented connection to the Mercer brothers. No reports placed him near the valley during the week they disappeared. No evidence linked him to any criminal activity involving hikers, yet his familiarity with the wilderness and his unpredictable behavior kept him on investigators' radar. But Thornell had not been seen since 2014. And without evidence he remained a name in a file, not a suspect. As summer turned to fall, Whitaker revisited early search maps, examining every overlooked detail. In doing so, she noticed something that made her pause. Historical notations, tiny marks on some older topographic maps, hinted at abandoned mining claims in the region. Most were relics from early 20th century operations, long forgotten and often dangerous. This observation became the catalyst for the breakthrough that would finally unravel the case. A graduate student at the University of Montana, Jennifer Hayes confirmed the deputy's suspicions. Hayes had been studying archival mining records and found documents referencing an early 1900s copper operation near the very valley where the tent was discovered. The Copper Ridge Mining Company had once carved deep shafts into the mountainside but abandoned them around 1918. Many entrances were improperly sealed or left to collapse under natural erosion. Abandoned mines unmapped, hidden by vegetation, unstable, became the new focus. Whitaker organized a team of mine safety experts and cave rescue specialists. For the first time since 2015, the search wasn't random. It wasn't hopeful wandering. It was targeted. Over 3 days, the team located several potential openings. Most were collapsed, sealed by mudslides or too narrow to enter. But on the 3rd afternoon, beneath a tangle of fallen logs, they discovered a shaft wide enough for a person to fall through. The vegetation around it was dense, undisturbed, natural, perfect camouflage for a hazard lying just beneath the surface. The shaft descended steeply into the earth, almost like a throat swallowing light. The rescue specialists lowered themselves carefully, lighting each section as they traveled downward. The mine stretched deep, far deeper than anyone expected. Old timber beams, rotten and fragile, lined passages leading into dark chambers. On the 2nd day of underground searching in a chamber nearly 200 feet below the surface, the team found what 3 years of searching had never uncovered. Human remains. Not clustered, but scattered, consistent with a fall followed by environmental movement over time. Near the remains, investigators recovered personal effects, jewelry, clothing fragments, and wallets. Despite the degradation, identification was immediate. They belonged to Aaron Bryan and Dylan Mercer. The mine conditions made recovery slow and dangerous. Toxic gases lingered. Sections near collapse had to be braced. but over several days, every fragment of evidence was transported to Helena for analysis. The timeline began to assemble itself with painful clarity. Forensic pathologists determined that the triplets likely fell into the shaft shortly after leaving their tent. Whether they left due to a noise curiosity or a brief walk remains unknown. But the pitch-black opening concealed beneath debris would have been nearly invisible even at close range, especially at night. The fall would have been catastrophic. The labyrinth of tunnels and chambers made escape impossible. With no light, no supplies, and no way to climb back to the surface, the brothers would have been trapped instantly. Investigators reconstructed the final sequence. The brothers set camp in the clearing expecting to spend the night. Something drew them outside, perhaps only a routine need. They walked toward the concealed shaft. One fell and the others followed in an attempt to help. None could climb out. The wilderness erased all signs of their passage. After years of theories, abduction, animal attacks, foul play, voluntary disappearance, the truth was stark, accidental, and devastating. The Mercers had not vanished at the hands of another. They had vanished into the landscape itself. Deputy Whitaker stood beside the sealed evidence crates when the final lab reports came in. The weight of closure settled heavily on her. For almost 4 years, she had carried this case in every quiet moment. Now she had an answer, but not the kind that eased the heart. The truth fit the evidence. The timeline aligned. The reconstruction was sound. But the cost of knowing was something the Mercer family would bear for the rest of their lives. With the recovery of the Mercer brothers' remains from the abandoned shaft, the case that had haunted the Flathead County Sheriff's Office for nearly 4 years finally reached an official conclusion. Investigators determined that Aaron Bryan and Dylan Mercer, all 25 years old at the time of their disappearance, had succumbed to a tragic accident. After leaving their remote campsite in the Blackfoot Valley, they had fallen into the partially concealed mine shaft, and the labyrinth of tunnels and chambers beneath made escape impossible. The timeline established by forensic analysis, the arrangement of the campsite, and the condition of their personal effects corroborated this sequence of events. No evidence suggested foul play, criminal intent, or negligence beyond the natural hazards of the wilderness. For Michael and Carol Mercer, the news brought a mixture of grief, exhaustion, and, in a sense, relief. After years of uncertainty of holding on to hope while scouring the mountains, they now had answers. The relief was tempered by the stark reality of loss. The 3 sons they had watched grow up who had shared their lives in ways only identical triplets would never return. Their mourning took on a new form, one rooted not in speculation, but in concrete evidence. Family members and close friends gathered quietly to process the knowledge, visiting the clearing and the remains in controlled, supervised recoveries, allowing themselves moments to confront the unchangeable. The broader community of Billings and surrounding areas who had followed the disappearance closely reacted with a similar combination of sorrow and closure. The story, once a local headline about missing hikers, had evolved into a cautionary tale and ultimately a demonstration of perseverance and technological advancement. Hundreds attended a memorial service at the Mercer Auto Repair Shop, which Michael had reopened in honor of his sons. The shop became a communal space for reflection, where the lives of Aaron Bryan and Dylan were remembered not only for the tragedy, but for the quiet joy, adventure, and close bonds they shared. Local outdoor organizations and search and rescue volunteers participated in vigils, placing flowers and small mementos near the clearing where the tent had been discovered. The investigative teams involved in the case, from Whitaker's deputy detail to the Helena forensic analysts, received recognition for their persistence. The deployment of advanced drone technology and systematic archival research had proved pivotal. Whitaker herself was promoted to detective, a professional milestone underscoring the importance of thorough investigation and the integration of new technology into wilderness search protocols. The case was formally closed in 2019, with law enforcement issuing statements reaffirming that all standard investigative procedures had been exhausted and that the conclusions were consistent with the evidence recovered. The Mercer case had broader implications. Montana's search and rescue operations adopted drones as a standard component of missing person investigations in remote areas. Historical research into abandoned mines and other natural hazards became a routine part of planning search grids. State authorities began surveying and marking potentially dangerous mine openings, posting warning signs, and restricting access where necessary. The clearing where the tent was found was left undisturbed as a quiet memorial, preserving the site where the brothers spent their final hours. Even with the case resolved, some questions remained unanswerable. Why the brothers left their tent at that particular moment, why they had not noticed the shaft, or whether other subtle environmental factors contributed to the accident could not be determined. The forest itself kept these details hidden, leaving the Mercer family and investigators with the knowledge of the outcome, but only partial insight into the moments that led to it. Yet in that resolution lay a measure of peace. The Mercer brothers' story became a touchstone for the value of preparation for the hidden dangers of wilderness areas and for the unrelenting commitment of families and investigators. Their memory lives on, not just in the auto shop that stands as a tribute, but in the procedures, safety awareness, and community vigilance their disappearance prompted. The shafts were sealed, warning signs posted, and the mountains, while still keeping many secrets, became slightly safer for those who followed. For Michael and Carol Mercer, for the investigators, and for the community that had watched, waited, and hoped for years, the case's closure provided a definitive end to uncertainty. The truth of what happened, the brothers lost to a hidden mine shaft, was harsh and final, but it was real. And in the reality they found the weight of closure, the acknowledgement of a life interrupted, and the quiet endurance of memory. The mountains of Montana remain vast, still, and unyielding, but the story of Aaron Bryan and Dylan Mercer is now etched into the collective consciousness of the region, a somber reminder of human vulnerability, the persistence of family, and the importance of diligence, technology, and care in the wilderness. The Mercer case closed the community would never forget, and the lessons endured safety awareness and remembrance. The brothers were gone, but their legacy of love, of adventurous spirit, and of the enduring connection between family and the land remains.